Y/N's POV. I was organizing files in the small corner of the office that had become my workspace when Jimin approached, a friendly smile on his face. "Hey, Y/N," he greeted, "could you bring the finalized financial report to Jungkook's office? We need it for the meeting." My heart skipped a beat at the mention of his name. Jungkook, the man I had collided with yesterday and the CEO of the company. The embarrassment from that moment hit me all over again, but I nodded quickly, shuffling through the neatly stacked folders to find the right one. "Got it," I said, my voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside me. Jimin's smile widened, almost as if he could sense my anxiety. "No need to be nervous. He doesn't bite much," he teased, patting my shoulder before walking back to his desk. I took a deep breath, gripping the file tightly in my hand. It was just another task, just another part of the job, nothing to be nervous about. I had faced worse, hadn't I? Like pleading with doctors in a hospital hallway while the weight of my mother's life hung in the balance. Squaring my shoulders, I walked down the hallway toward Jungkook's office. Each step felt heavier, and I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. Deliver the file, then leave, simple. Jungkook's POV. The sound of a gentle knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. I looked up just as Jimin entered, followed by Y/N, who was holding a thick file in her hands. There she was, the girl from yesterday, looking calmer but still a little hesitant, her eyes darting nervously between me and the documents she held. "Jungkook, this is Y/N, Jimin said with a warm smile. "She's the one handling the reports for this quarter." I watched as Y/N stepped forward, offering the file to me with both hands. Her posture was careful, almost too formal, as if she didn't want to make a mistake. I took the file, my fingers brushing against hers briefly, and felt a small jolt, like an echo of yesterday's collision. "Thank you," I said, my voice neutral, but my gaze stayed on her face, trying to read the tension behind her eyes. She was clearly uneasy, but there was something else there, a determination, a strength hidden beneath the surface. "Y/N, right?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, her voice polite but distant. Her eyes flicked down to the floor as if avoiding my scrutiny, and I frowned, curious about what she might be hiding. "Have you been working here long?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "A few weeks," she replied, her tone measured. "I'm just helping out part-time." Jimin, sensing the awkwardness, jumped in with his usual lightheartedness. "Y/N's been doing a great job, Jungkook. She's been a real help around here." "Good to know," I said, still watching her closely. "Thank you, Y/N. I'll go over this report now." She nodded, her eyes lifting to meet mine for a fleeting second before she quickly excused herself and left the room. I watched her retreating figure, feeling a strange pull in my chest. There was more to her than what she let on, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to know what it was. Jimin lingered, a knowing look on his face as he leaned against my desk. "She's something, isn't she?" I didn't respond, flipping open the file to mask my thoughts. Jimin's smile widened, and he walked out with a casual, "I told you, you'd like her." But it wasn't about liking her, it was about understanding her. There was a mystery surrounding Y/N, and it was one I was determined to solve. I couldn't let her remain just another name on a payroll. Not when she was the only one who had managed to catch my attention in a long time. Y/N's POV. As soon as I was out of Jungkook's office, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My heart was still pounding, my mind racing with a million thoughts. Had I seemed nervous? Did I look unprofessional? Why did he have to be the one I bumped into yesterday, of all people? I shook my head, trying to dispel the anxiety. It didn't matter. The file was delivered, and my job was done. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, the way he seemed to see through my polite facade. I'd have to be more careful, there was too much at stake to draw any unwanted attention, especially from someone like him. I returned to my corner of the office, burying myself in paperwork to distract from the lingering weight of that encounter. But even as I focused on the numbers, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had shifted, something I wasn't prepared to face. The truth was, I had too many secrets, and the last thing I needed was someone like Jungkook prying into my life. Author's POV. The atmosphere in the office had changed. Every encounter between Jungkook and Y/N seemed to bring attention that neither of them fully understood nor acknowledged. Jungkook's focus, once razor-sharp, wavered each time Y/N was nearby, and Y/N found herself growing more distracted by his presence, no matter how hard she tried to push it aside. Y/N's days were a constant blur, juggling part-time work and hospital visits, barely catching a moment to breathe. She couldn't afford to be distracted by the handsome CEO with the intense gaze, no matter how her heart raced every time he looked her way. Her mother's health was fragile, and every day was a struggle to keep up with the mounting bills. But she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened when she was near him, the way his deep voice seemed to pull her in, even when she knew it was dangerous to get too close. Jungkook, on the other hand, was fighting his own inner battle. Y/N was different from anyone he'd ever met, so genuine, so determined, and yet, so fragile in a way that made him want to protect her. But he wasn't about to admit that, not even to himself. He had worked too hard to get where he was, building a reputation as a ruthless businessman who never let emotions interfere. Yet here he was, caught up in thoughts of Y/N, wondering why she looked so tired, why she seemed so lost at times. Jungkook's POV. I was in my office, the city's skyline visible from the window beside me, but my focus was on the stack of papers before me. At least, it should have been. Instead, my mind kept drifting to Y/N, the way she had fumbled with the files the other day, the way her eyes had avoided mine when I asked if she was all right. It was frustrating. I didn't have time for distractions, especially not now when the company was on the brink of another major deal. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts, and my heart did that annoying little jump it had started doing lately. I looked up to see Y/N standing there, holding a folder, her eyes determined yet hesitant. Y/N, Mr. John, I have the report you asked for. She stepped inside, her gaze firmly on the folder she was holding. For a moment, I was annoyed that she wouldn't look at me, that she kept treating me like I was just her boss. I wanted something else. Something more. But that was ridiculous. I shouldn't want anything from her. She was just an employee, and I was the CEO. Nothing more. I took the folder from her hand, my fingers brushing against hers for just a second. Her breath hitched, and she stepped back quickly as if the contact had burned her. Jungkook, thank you, Y/N. That will be all. You can go home now. She nodded, her face impassive, and turned to leave, but I couldn't help the way my eyes followed her retreating form, noticing the tension in her shoulders. There was something she wasn't telling me, something she was carrying alone. And I wanted to know what it was, even if I knew I shouldn't care. Y/N's POV. Why does he have to look at me like that? Every time I handed him a file, every time our eyes met, even briefly, I felt my defenses cracking. Jungkook was impossible to ignore. His presence filled the room, made the air feel heavier, and it was becoming harder and harder to pretend that his gaze didn't affect me. But I couldn't afford to get involved with him, even if he wasn't my boss. My life was already complicated enough. My mother needed me, and I didn't want to risk my job by attracting unwanted attention. There were already rumors about the handsome, young CEO and the part-time assistant who seemed to always be around him. I couldn't give people a reason to talk. So, I kept my distance. I focused on the work, on my mother's recovery, and ignored the flutter in my chest whenever Jungkook was near. I had to. Author's POV. The encounters between them became more frequent, though neither of them acknowledged it. Jungkook found himself asking Y/N for help with tasks he could have easily assigned to anyone else, just to see her reaction, to watch her try and maintain that professional distance. And every time he did, he would catch her glancing at him with that look in her eyes, something between curiosity and longing. One evening, Jungkook stayed late, immersed in paperwork when a soft knock sounded on the door. Y/N entered, holding a stack of documents, her eyes tired but determined. Jungkook's gaze softened involuntarily at the sight of her usual energy dimmed by exhaustion. Y/N, Mr. John, I finished the report you asked for. I know it's late, but I wanted to make sure it was done. Jungkook couldn't stop himself. He stood up, moving closer to her until they were inches apart. Y/N froze, clearly caught off guard by his proximity. Jungkook, Y/N. Are you alright? You look tired. Her eyes widened, panic flashing for a second before she looked away, stepping back, creating the distance between them again. She forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Y/N, I'm fine, Mr. John. Just work. It's nothing I can't handle. But he could see the lie in her eyes, the way she was struggling to hold herself together. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that she didn't have to handle everything alone, but the words got stuck in his throat. It wasn't his place to get involved in her personal life, no matter how much he wanted to. Jungkook's POV. I shouldn't have asked. I knew it was crossing a line, and yet, I couldn't help it. There was something about Y/N that drew me in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. She was brave, stubborn, and so painfully independent that it almost hurt to watch. But the more she pulled away, the more I wanted to understand her. I'd never been one to back down from a challenge, and Y/N felt like the biggest challenge I'd ever faced. But I couldn't let myself get distracted. Not now. The company needed my focus, and I couldn't afford to let my feelings, whatever they were, get in the way. So, I kept my distance, and stayed professional, even as every encounter with her left me feeling more conflicted than before. But she was under my skin now, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew it was only a matter of time before something had to give. Y/N's POV. Jungkook's concern had startled me. It was the first time I'd seen him look at me with something other than detached professionalism, and it threw me off balance. But I couldn't let my guard down. I had to stay focused and keep my head above water. But each time I saw him, it became harder. His presence was a constant reminder of what I was trying to avoid, a distraction I couldn't afford. There was something in the way he looked at me, something I didn't want to understand because it would complicate everything. I had enough complications already. My mother needed me. The hospital bills were growing, and my part-time job barely covered the basics. I couldn't risk losing my job by getting involved with Jungkook, no matter how drawn to him I felt. So, I did what I always did, I smiled, kept things professional, and pretended that I didn't feel anything when he looked at me like he could see right through all my defenses. But deep down, I knew I was only fooling myself.